Won't you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes?
Start today with Troy in Detroit. How are you, Troy?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're good. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you, or Zombie Day, or Witch Day, or whatever you want to call
right?
it.
Yes. Or Vampire Hunter.
Actually, you got it wrong. This is Kirk Cameron calling.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
So what's on your mind?
Any more Left Behind movies
my friend
coming?
kind of told me about your show. My friend's an atheist, and he wanted to call your show, but he thought it'd be better if I called your show because I'm a Christian, and he thought it'd be more funny if I called your show and brought up some kind of conversation. So I've been kind of pondering, and I got a pretty good question I wanted to ask you guys.
Okay.
All right.
So a lot of times I hear, I can't say the majority, but a lot of times I hear a lot of atheists tell me that, sorry, my phone sucks if you get feedback. But
No, you sound fine.
You sound great, yeah.
Yeah, you sound all
okay.
right.
I get a lot of atheists that tell me if there is a God, why do this God let bad stuff happen? You know, the famous question.
Yeah, problem of
Like,
evil. Right.
So my question is to the atheist is, if bad stuff happens in the world, like you realize that there's diseases and wars and poverty and, you know, a lot of things that happen to humanity, then as an atheist, why would you want to have children knowing that you're going to bring them into a world where possibly they might have a disease or born into a situation where there could be poverty or suffering? So it seems like the question kind of goes both ways. You're attacking this, why is there a God that allows bad things to happen, but at the same time, as an atheist, you're having children knowing for the fact that your child is going to die one day. And
yeah.
Well, they are kind of. Well, you've got a kid, so you're the best to qualify to answer that question. So go ahead and explain.
Well, actually, first of all, I'm not that big on the problem of evil myself, because even if the problem of evil works, all it would prove is that there isn't a God who's not a dick. But since there's no evidence one way or the other for the existence of any gods, I mean, as far as we know, there's as much evidence for the Christian God as there is for, like, Dionysus, who's the Greek god of wine, and he's just into partying and boozing. And then the question is, why doesn't Dionysus stop bad things from happening?
Yeah.
He's busy.
Right.
But, I mean, second of all, obviously the fact that I'm concerned about there being evil in the world doesn't mean that I think it's, an utterly horrible place. I mean, for one thing, I happen to be privileged to live in 21st century America, where there's cool stuff like, plenty of food to eat and video games and...
a roof over your head. And
a roof over my head. I mean, I have a pretty good life compared to... a person who is starving in Africa and dies in childbirth. So, the problem of evil is mainly, if there's an all-good God, then why do some people live just tragically short, horrible lives? And I'm not one of them, and I don't think my kid is going to be either. But that doesn't mean that it's not a concern for me. But again, that's not disproof of God.
Yeah. It's more a question of the whole thing of whether or not you think the world is such an awful, horrible place that you don't want to bring children into it isn't probably necessarily a theist or atheist question. That just may be your own, whatever your outlook is on that issue of, wanting, what's worthwhile about being a parent and whether or not you're up to the task.
Well, it just kind of seems like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it just kind of seems like, people question God's ethics, but at the same time, humans have this ethic, well, since I have, a good income or can provide for my family, I'm going to bring this child into the world, and then maybe the child is born with multiple sclerosis or some kind of disease.
Yeah, I mean, life isn't perfect.
What gives you the right to have your ethics opposed to God's ethics, saying that, well, my ethics are cool because I have a good income and a good job.
Well, in our case, since we don't believe a God exists, so we don't compare our ethics to that of a being that we consider to be mythical.
Right, except hypothetically,
your first statement where you said, well, the Christian God's a dick, it just seems kind of funny that your questioning is ethics, but at the same time you're still having your own ethics, which to some people can be kind of sadist or immoral. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, do you agree with everything, every decision that God makes or decrees in the biblical stories?
Do I?
Yeah.
Webpage? Yeah.
So like, if God were to drop by and say, "Hey, Troy, I want you to kill your son for me," would you do that?
So you're going back to the story of Abraham. Yeah, that's definitely.
Well, I mean, you said that you agreed with every moral command and decision that God made in the Bible, so inclusively. So going back to the Old Testament shouldn't matter because it's in there. So if what you're saying is that you agree with every decision and every instruction on a moral basis that your God makes, then you would have to agree with those that say, for example, in those Old Testament commandments, like disobedient children should be taken out and stoned, or you shouldn't wear blended fabrics, or eat shellfish, and all the ones that today, to a modern sensibility, where presumably we're using our human, post-enlightenment, maybe secular ethics, we think, well, those are kind of silly things to have rules about.
Particularly, the thing with ethics, though, is that you're saying that I don't have to agree with God's ethics to agree with the Bible to say that I believe it literally. No, I think it's crazy and stupid that God has these rules, but who am I to say what God wants to do? He can do whatever he wants.
So you would kill your son?
I'm saying that if God commanded something, he's God, who am I to question his ethics?
So the answer is yes.
Just like you're saying, you can do your own thing because you don't believe in God, so that way you create your own ethics based on your own standards. Who am I to judge your ethics because you created your own ethics? You know what I'm saying?
So I think that a person who would agree to kill their son based on a vision and no explanation would be a horrible person.
Yeah.
And I think
that's your opinion, though.
Okay.
Why would you not be a horrible person to murder a member of your own family, especially your own child, because you were told to do so by an authority figure? And you didn't take a minute to think, wait a minute, is this thing the authority figure telling me to do right or wrong, and should I obey it simply because he is the authority figure?
But did he kill his son?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because the point of that story is that he was willing to do it unquestionably.
He did it. He was obedient. That was the lesson in the story.
That's right. It's good to be that obedient, right?
So the idea where biblical ethics is concerned, what you're saying is that the correct way to be, the morally correct way to be, is unquestionably obedient, no matter how reprehensible the moral command is. And whether or not God steps in the last minute and goes, just kidding, that's immaterial to the main issue, which is if God tells you to do it, you got to do it. If God tells you to put a gun to your...
the United States Army do that every day when they...
No. Soldiers are not required to obey what are illegal or immoral commands.
Yeah, and in fact, the leaders of the country who issue those orders are ultimately intended, at least, to be held accountable. And if they don't wind up being held accountable by their own country, they get subjected to something like the Nuremberg trials after the war, where they get taken in for war crimes. There is no ultimate authority in usual human ethics.
Yeah, and there's no situation. I mean, a CO in any sort of military situation isn't this infallible God. He has rules that he has to obey. He has oversight. A God has no oversight. I mean, a God is as high. I mean, the buck stops there. So if the God is telling you to do something, and you're like, this goes against absolutely everything that I know in my heart and to be right, and that where I can actually see and have empirical, straightforward, right there in front of my eyes evidence that the consequences of this act would be devastating and destructive and bad. If the God tells me to do it, I have to ignore all of that and go with it anyway. So why is that sort of blind obedience to authority anything at all resembling morality? Why is that a moral way to be? Why consider that to be the right way to be? If you know something's wrong, as I said, take your wife, take your child, take a loved, or take a random stranger on the street and do a completely gratuitously horrible thing to them, because I'm God and I'm testing you to see if you obey me. Seems to me that makes that God, a big fat douche. I mean, just an absolutely horrible being,
I totally
abominable.
agree with you on
Okay,
that
then.
one, but
All right. But that's the thing.
But
That's
it's
it.
not. That's reasoning
That's Abraham and
and logic
Isaac.
is not Christianity.
Well, we agree with that, but
Yeah, definitely, dude. We definitely agree with that.
Okay, well then I think we're done.
Is not logical. It's not rational.
Keep going.
All right,
No.
you're follow that train of thought. Just
So, I mean, I'm not trying to argue logic, because that would be stupid, because saying Jesus walked on water or Moses parted the Red Sea, that just sounds crazy, right?
Pretty crazy, yeah.
It sounds like stories. You know.
Okay, so I'm not trying to argue that point. My point I'm trying to argue is that it seems like atheists pick and choose their own ethics based on their own moral experiences,
And so do
which I think
Christians.
is
They
kind
just
of
call
savage,
it.
because they question a moral God, but at the same time, what is your standard of ethics? I mean, you see that just because America might have more materialistic things and you could have a better survival rate, doesn't mean that you could bring in a child and then your child could have a disease that you don't even know about. I mean, what is that, with
Yeah,
Darwin?
well, none of us thinks about. I mean, none of us predicts the future, right? I mean, yes, anything horrible could happen in anyone's life, including your own. If you have
So
a
why have
child, there's
children
no
then?
guarantee.
Why have children?
Well,
because
maybe because you
they
want-
might actually enjoy their life and they might enrich
Maybe-
the lives of others around them.
maybe you
Don't
might want
think
to.
that's
Maybe you
kinda
might want to be a
sick
parent.
to have a child knowing that he's going to die or maybe have a disease?
Well,
No,
you're
I mean,
going to
that's
die, so don't you think you could get diseases? Don't you think it's sick to stay alive when those things can happen to you?
Do you like being
I
alive?
Where's
mean,
the
I,
one-
have a choice.
you-
I mean, I'm already alive, but I'm saying,
Okay.
like, I have
Yeah.
a choice to bring a person into the world.
If you
I
had a
can't help-
choice to
You know
go
the
back
whole-
in time and cancel out your own birth, would you do that?
Yeah.
What? So wait, ask me that question again.
I mean, if you had a choice to have never been born, would you decide that way?
Yeah, definitely, dude. This world
Really?
sucks. So,
Well, I'm glad that Christianity has brought so much
Christianity
meaning and
is
happiness to your
very
life.
bleak then.
Yeah, I'm glad. Wow.
I mean, why in the heck would you bring? I mean, as an atheist, why in the heck would you? I mean, that sounds kind of sadistic too. I mean, that kind of
doesn't.
sounds like a douche
Because-
just because you have a good life or whatever, you think your child is going to have a good life too.
I think it's
Maybe your
likely.
child might have some kind of
Well-
mental illness or something, kills himself. I
Could
mean,
happen.
that's kind of a douche too. So you're kind of like a sadistic god of your own self.
So do you think your parents are responsible for every bad thing that's happened to you also? I mean, as parents, you bring a child into the world.
Society and everything is responsible for what kind of person we are, not just our parents.
So they're
But I'm
also
just saying
responsible
that
for the good things that
atheist
happen,
is
right?
just as sadistic as believing in a god. It's the same thing, man.
So
Okay.
you're comparing bringing a child into the world, not knowing whether they will have a good life, to actively giving people the order to kill or enslave other people. In your mind, that's the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much, because you're basically bringing a person in to eventually be killed. It will
Okay.
die eventually.
Well, all I can say
You know
is,
this whole thing a few minutes ago where you talked about, not being logical or rational? I think we're seeing some of that
yeah,
here.
all I can say is we have really different outlooks on life,
Yeah,
and I think
and-
we're going to have to leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, you've told us you think the world is a miserable place. You don't seem to be a terribly happy person. I think that your problems run a lot deeper than the confusion between theistic and atheistic morality. And really, that's kind of where we can go.
It's not that. I'm just saying, like, you pick on God, but at the same time, it's like you can't give me a good answer about bringing you, just because you might have privileges doesn't mean everyone has privileges.
But we already have answered that. We cannot promise a perfect life for ourselves or for anyone in it. But the point is that, all things considered, it's better to be alive than not alive. And at least when you are alive and bad things happen to you, you can work to improve them. You can work to improve things that are going on badly in your life. If you have a child, or if you have a relative or a good friend, or even someone in your community whose life is going very badly, you can pitch in and do things to help that person improve their lot. I mean, that's the whole thing that's our social contract. That's what we are as social beings. We lift one another up when each other are down.
Once you get to the New Testament, don't you think that that's the same thing there? I mean,
the New Testament that brings in eternal...
Testament, but you're not really talking about the New Testament, where the commandment is to turn the other cheek and to resist evil.
No, we're not talking about the New... From our perspective, we're not talking about Old Testament versus New Testament at all, because since we don't include either of those things in our ethical outlook on life, they're immaterial. What we're trying to show you is that we have just completely secular and rational bases for the kinds of things that we do and the reasons that we do them that don't require. I mean, just the reference to any sort of biblical idea is immaterial. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. We can be good and nice and decent and kind to one another and help each other out when if someone's life is not going well, someone has a horrible disease. That's why we have doctors. That's why we have people who fund charities to help people who can't pay medical bills. That's why we have all of these things that we do for one another to help each other out. We can be that way as people on our own. We don't need a divine commandment for it. We don't need to say, oh well, here's one half of our holy book that has a list of rules, but the second half has a different list of rules which are nicer. And so we don't. None of that needs to be referenced anymore, because we've got each other and we're all we need. And that's why it's worth it. And that's why this world doesn't have to be the horrible place you think it is. Because once you get rid of that superstition, and once you get rid of those old rules, you don't have that hanging over your life anymore. And you can see people as people.
Arguing the point that God allows bad things to happen, but we allow bad things to happen too. It's not really...
We do, but at least we can
hold... We're not omnipotent.
That's right, but at least when we do that, we know who's responsible and we can hold ourselves accountable, and we don't have to just shrug our shoulders and go, oh well, God works in mysterious ways. I think we're done. Let's move on.
All right.
Thanks for calling.
Thanks for calling, Troy.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I had a good time. Hey, just
say
by
hi
the way,
to your friend
I'm not miserable, but I wanted to give you a good argument. So
okay. Well, we appreciate that.
I hope it caused good thoughts and good dialogue.
Troy, we appreciated the call. We really enjoyed the discussion.
Definitely some quotable stuff coming out of here. See ya.
Thanks.